Okay. Okay, good afternoon. Welcome to the Virtual Graphic Novel Club. My name is Erica Ware.
And I am Roland Wellmaker.
And thank you guys for joining us today. We will be starting off the spooky month with the Marvel horror comics of Marvel here. So we're going to do it a little bit different. Today Roland is going to take the lead on a lot of stuff, and I'm going to just pop in every once in a while, but we'll do the same background. We'll talk about characters, we'll talk about teams, and we'll also talk about some series that are great reads in Marvel horror genre. Let's see. So we're going to jump right in because we have a lot to cover today in the background of Marvel horror. After World War II, superheroes started to wane in popularity, and it was during this time that comic book publishers started to realize that the true crime, romance, and even horror stories were gaining in popularity. Timely Comics, which we all know as of today, became Atlas, and then it became what we know today of as Marvel. The publisher of Captain America, and his titles in Captain America, Weird Tales, which lasted two issues. In the 1950s, Timely became Atlas, and Atlas had Adventures into the Weird World, Adventures into Terror, Menace, Mystics, Astonishing Journey, Into Mystery, Strange Tales, and Marvel Tales. Atlas published almost 400 comics across 18 titles over 5 years. Stan Lee and Bill Everett actually introduced Zombies Simon Garth in Menace #5. A lot of the characters we're going to talk about today come from these early comics. And as we know, comic book characters are reissued and reintroduced to new audiences. So we'll kind of see that with some of the characters we talk about today. The era of horror comics would end after the 1954 publication of Seduction of Innocence. We've talked about this book before in a number of our graphic novel clubs because it comes up so much when you're talking about comics. And the gentleman who wrote it was Frederick Wertham. Wertham argued that comics would negatively affect kids' actions and personality with excessive introductions of violence, drug use, occult scenarios, sexual themes, and more. After the self-imposed comic code, that was the comics, Marvel and DC's response to Seduction of Innocence, the comic code approval stickers came along, and to play more in the horror genre, the comics started to display storylines centered more around adventures and sci-fi style monsters. So you lost a lot of the pulp and the detective stuff, the gritty stuff that was in early comics, and a lot of the horror stuff because it would not pass the comics code of approval. In the 1970s, Marvel had a large expansion into a horror series, in part because of the comic code authority kind of had to loosen their reins in the 70s. There was a lot of things going on behind the scenes, as we covered in the past. You had the civil rights movement going on. You had a lot of movements of the 60s. You had the free love movement of the hippie culture. You had the civil rights movement. You had a lot of assassinations during that time, and life was really real for those outside of the comic book world. So they kind of loosened up the comic code, and there was some introduction of more adult stuff into the 70s. You had stories featuring vampires, ghouls, and werewolves again, and everything became fair game. This reissued a resurgence of old and some new title characters such as Tomb of Dracula, Werewolf by Night, Son of Satan, Ghostwriter, Morbius, the living vampire, Frankenstein's monster, Amphibian, and Man-Thing, Satana, Blade, and the Darkhold. Fast forward to now, and you can see these horror elements and characters interacting with the current stable of superheroes and storylines that are prevalent in today's comics, in today's Marvel comics, exactly. Several Marvel horror characters have made it to TV and big screens, such as Blade and Ghostwriter, both of them. Blade, headlined by Wesley Snipes, and he will be reintroduced again sometime soon. And of course, Ghostwriter, headlined by Nicolas Cage in the 2000s. One of the things that horror does for us, and especially when you're talking about media, is it can help us understand turbulent times and events. So you see a spike in horror genre in the 1950s and 1970s in visual media, because you have War of the Worlds, Invasions of the Body Snatchers, Night of the Living Dead in the 1960s. And these media events crossroads with the McCarthy era of the United States and the civil rights unrest of the 1960s. And according to writer Joe Hill, horror can help us explain human behavior and the origins of evil that is out there. And so as we're talking about some of these characters today, a lot of them, like I said, they were from earlier times of comics, but the reintroduction of them were for reasons. And we will jump into them right now. So some of the popular characters Roland is going to cover, and I'm going to pop in every once in a while and possibly ask questions. So I'm giving it over to you, Roland.
All right, all right. So our first character we have on the list is Marvel's Man-Thing. His first appearance would be in Savage Tales #1 back in 1971. The main character, Dr. Ted Sallis, a biochemistry professor at Empire State University, he was basically sheltered and had no knowledge of his destiny and preferred books to people. The United States Army recruited him into Project Sulphur, which sought a means to survive biochemical warfare. The Allies developed serum SO2, which granted immunity to all known toxic biochemicals, but it had mutagenic effects that would have transformed people into monsters. After this, Sallis is reassigned to work to recreate the super soldier serum and modify the serum SO2. Well, his wife became bitter and worked with AIM, Advanced Idea Mechanics, to steal the serum. And when they attack him, he basically injects the only sample that he has into his body, destroys all his paperwork and notes. And he crashes his car into the swamp while he's fleeing. Now, this swamp basically has magical energies, as the swamp contains the nexus of reality. So the swamp kind of sensed Dr. Sallis being thrown into the mix there. And the serum combined with the mystical powers of the swamp basically transformed him into the hideous creature that we know as the Man-Thing. All right.
Now, and his story is a little bit similar to, they came around the same time, but the Swamp Thing, the Swamp Thing from DC, that the swamp is mysterious and full of horror and magic and all this.
Right.
Same
Yeah. At that point in time, it was I think in horror stories, voodoo was real popular, and the mythos of the swamp itself, and it basically lent that. And as we'll get into DC next in the next meeting, we'll talk about the Swamp Thing, who is basically DC's
man.
Yes.
Yeah. All right.
All right. So our next character is a very popular character, and we're speaking of Eric Brooks, better known as Blade. Eric Brooks was born in Soho, London on the 24th of October, 1922. His father, Lucas Cross, was a member of a secret society called the Order of Tirana, who at the time he sent his pregnant wife, Tara, to England before he was to be taken prisoner in Latveria, which we know is basically the land of Dr. Doom.
Yeah, I was gonna say
Uh,
that sounds familiar, Doctor Doom.
right. So while she's in London, she basically takes on the name Vanessa Brooks and basically found shelter in a brothel. And when the brothel owner named Madame Vanity agreed to give her cover, as Madame Vanity was also another member of the Order of Tyrannus. It was sometime later that she started experiencing labor complications, and Tara was forced to seek a doctor's assistance. Now, this doctor, Deacon Frost, unknown to them, was actually a vampire who was passing as a doctor. And when she started to give birth, he started to feed on her as she gave birth, therefore passing on a series of vampiric enzymes that had an effect that altered the baby. The enzymes entered the infant's bloodstream, transforming him into a being tainted by a vampire's kiss, but not fully converted. In other words, he became half human and half vampire, also called a dhampir. Frost was driven away before he could slay the child, but the mother perished, thereby leaving the orphaned Eric Brooks to be raised at Madame Vanity's brothel. Um, Basically, once he learned his background, he steeled himself to the cause of ending the vampire menace. He is also known as the Daywalker because since he is not a full vampire, he can tolerate the sunlight. You wanted to say something?
No, I was gonna say, yeah, he's known as the Daywalker, and he shows up a lot. He had his own series in the 70s, but after that, he would show up a lot in Spider-Man, and he hunted, was it Morpheus?
Not Morpheus.
Dracula?
Mobius. No, he hunted Mobius.
Mobius. Okay.
Mobius. Yeah.
Yep.
So, all right. Our next character that we have up.
That's Ghostwriter.
Now, actually, the name Ghostwriter can be spanned across several characters. And so what we'll do here is we'll just talk about the Ghostwriter itself, the spirit of vengeance. It's been said that over the years, the title has been used by any individual possessed by a spirit of vengeance or similar demon, such as Zarathos. The most famous Ghostwriter being Johnny Blaze, who sold his soul to the demon lord Mephisto. Other individuals include Johnny's half-brother, Danny Ketch, who was imbued with a spirit of vengeance by the medallion on his motorcycle's gas cap. We have Alejandra Jones, who was chosen to become Zarathos' next host after Blaze gave up his demonic powers. And we have Robbie Reyes, who was indwelled by a spirit of vengeance after being mortally wounded and possessed by the demonic ghost of his uncle Eli Morrow. Now, the Ghostwriter of the movies would be Johnny Cage. Nicolas Cage's version of Johnny Blaze. Now, in the movie, I know you got a chance to see Sam Elliott, who played as one of the older Ghostwriters of Cowboy Times, basically. And then in Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., we get a more current look at the Ghostwriter as he's played. They have Robbie Reyes, who is basically the Hispanic or Latino Ghostwriter. Each one of these Ghostwriters basically imbue a vehicle or means of transportation, basically with hellfire. So as you see in the pictures, you see the horse, the motorcycle, and the hot rod. Now they're in the Marvel's current, I think it's one of their extreme storylines. The new Ghostwriter shows up on a flaming spider, and he is basically of the Hyperborean age, which would be around the time, because it's Conan the Barbarian who was telling a story that a Ghostwriter showed up once, and he was riding a large spider. So can't wait to read that storyline.
Oh.
All right. Our next character, straight from the depths of hell. Um, Basically, the Chapel of Dresden cult sought to create a half human, half demon child. And this child, created through this process, would become Damien Hellstrom. Now, his story begins when the cult purchased Victoria Hellstrom from her satanist parents. And what they did, they tattooed her womb with satanic symbols, enabling her to bear a child that would be able to usher in a demonic spirit. Basically, Satan came to earth in human form and was drawn to and seduced Victoria after this ritual. They married quickly and they moved to a mansion on Fire Lake. A year later, Damon was born. Damon also has a sister named Satana, but instead of being raised at Fire Lake, she was raised in hell by Satan himself. Now, Damon was being raised on earth by his human mother and basically his father's servants. Once his mother found out about her lover's true nature, she basically had to be institutionalized, and she also saw his true form as well. So that led to Damon being raised in an orphanage, which was basically a Jesuit monastery. And so for over 3 years, once he became of age, he basically studied the scripture, but he kind of shrugged off and never became an ordained minister, because he learned of his inheritance of Fire Lake. After he read his mother's diary and learned of his father's true nature, he actually heard his father's call and promises of power. Now, he removed his Ankh chain, which was protecting him all these years, and was able to access the mansion's portal to hell. Here he confronted Satan, and ultimately refusing his father's offer, he ended up stealing his father's trident and used it to summon his demon steeds and his chariot to escape hell and seal the portal behind him. Now, this character can be seen in current times on Hulu's miniseries. Well, it's only one season, and it's called Hellstrom.
Really?
Yes, you need to check that out. It's him and his sister, and it's before they actually, I think they already kind of know their powers,
Okay.
but they don't know them fully.
Okay.
I was hoping for another season, but it got canceled before it even got started, the same way they did Swamp Thing.
Oh, you know what? Because Hulu did have a lot of Marvel's properties,
Right.
even though Hulu is, I think before the whole Disney Plus thing came along, a lot of their properties were on Hulu, and then Hulu then decided, Disney Plus was like, no more. So, yeah, because they had Runaways, this obviously. So, yeah. Kind of like Netflix and what happened with them, some of their Marvel properties.
Right.
Which I'm sure will not, I don't know if they'll continue them on Disney Plus.
Probably not. I think they said some of their more adult properties may still make it to Hulu.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, because I think Hulu is part of Disney.
Yes, it is. It's part of that whole umbrella.
ESPN, like it's all one thing. It's all one thing.
Yeah. All right. So moving on, we have father-daughter monster hunter pair, Ulysses and Elsa Bloodstone. Now, they don't occur simultaneously in the comics, but over maybe a year or two in their history. So we'll start with Ulysses, who is a prehistoric gentleman.
Say the least.
The blood gem that's in the middle of his chest basically is alien in nature. It arrived on Earth in 8250 BC. The utilization of this blood gem had allowed it to be located anew by a being called the Exomind, which allegedly decided that it wished to observe the evolution of humanity through disinterested eyes. It basically required a host whose entire existence revolved around a single purpose. So it decided on revenge. The gem's fiery trip through Earth's atmosphere had drawn the attention of a hunter who directed his subsequent hunts in that direction. Spying a cloaked figure, later to be known as Ulysses, the hunter followed him into a cavern where he approached an advanced citadel. Though shocked by Ulysses' monstrous appearance, the hunter was granted great power by Ulysses and sent to bring his tribe to the citadel, so they too could gain power. However, the ceremony proved fatal to the hunter's tribe. The hunter, who had survived due to the energies he now possessed, leapt atop the blood gem in an effort to stop the process. The blood gem exploded, and one geometrically perfect fragment embedded itself in the savage's sternum, while the rest of the pieces were scattered across the planet. The blood gem's fragments basically exerce certain wavelengths of energy. So the hunter had become immortal, and he dedicated himself to exacting revenge upon Ulysses, the being whom he held responsible for the deaths of his people. The savage took the name of Ulysses Bloodstone. In the 20th century, Ulysses married and had a daughter, Elsa Bloodstone, but he abandoned his family. She was born in Boston, Massachusetts, and was actually raised in England and saw Europe as home. Her father had been abusive and abandoned the family basically when she was 2, so she didn't really get a chance to know him. After he died, she settled in the former family estate in Boston, and decided to start a monster hunting career as well, using the powers of the Bloodstone, as it was mounted in a choker that she wore whenever the situation demanded. And that's Ulysses and Elsa Bloodstone. Our next,
excuse me, as I was reading like their background, because depending on which, like according to Marvel, she did meet her father once she became an adult, and by this time I think he was such advanced in age, he was asking her to, end his life so that he could have peace and death, and she refused him.
Right, like I said, it was only a couple of. It's only a couple of.
Yeah, it's like I think and she was just like, absolutely not. Like, you have lived eternity and been selfish your entire life, and you will live out the rest of your days. I think by that time he was either sick or something like that, and she was like, no, you will suffer. Their father-daughter relationship was not the best.
Right.
All right.
So going on to the next, The Werewolf by Night, Jack Russell. First appearance, Marvel Spotlight, #2, February 1972. Basically, the Russoff line stretches back many centuries. The first confirmed manifestation is Grigory Russoff in 1795. Dracula slew his wife Louisa after he refused to acknowledge Dracula's primacy upon his return to Transylvania. Grigory then ambushed and destroyed Dracula, but was turned into a werewolf by Lydia, a werewolf formerly imprisoned by the vampire lord. Grigory took a second wife, but accounts vary as to why lycanthropy failed to pass to his descendants. Decades later, another Gregor Russoff married Laura, the former girlfriend of his younger brother Philip. Now, Jacob, later known as Jack, was born soon after, and Laura was pregnant with Lissa within 2 years of their marriage. However, when lightning struck Russoff's Transylvanian castle during a full moon, the werewolf Gregor escaped confinement and began attacking the villagers, who then tracked down and killed Russoff with silver bullets. Gregor's mother, Maria, was stoned and driven from the village, made to live with the gypsies and learn magic. After Gregor's death, Laura found Philip, who had moved to Los Angeles. and jealousizing his name to Russell, they then married after a year. Jack and Lisa remained unaware of Philip's past. After being critically injured in a car crash on his 18th birthday, Laura barely had time to tell Jack about his true father and the curse of the werewolf, making Jack promise not to harm Philip before dying. So having him being the one to inherit the lycanthropy the night before, Jack actually slew Grant, but also wrongly blamed Philip for a while. And Grant was another person who had been around the family for some means and was a business partner with his father. It was at this time that Laura left Castle Rusoff in Jack's name, but Philip, the trustee, sold the castle to Miles Blackgar, who had it moved to an island off the California coast. So as of now, the Jack Russell actually inhabits a castle off of the coast of California, and that is Werewolf by Night.
And he was one of those reincarnated characters too, right? Like from the early pulp days of
Well, what it was,
Atlas.
it said he was his original character. What it was, they did original Wolfman characters, and when they decided to give the Wolfman like a whole background and everything, that's what they did, because they were making him and going from a pulp character to an actual Marvel character.
Gotcha.
And so that's why he gets this different background that actually ties him into Dracula, so that the older stories from the 50s, they don't seem so out of place. Now you can look at these and say, oh, okay, so this werewolf, led to this werewolf who is the current werewolf. Now we do have another werewolf in the Marvel universe.
We sure do.
And
man,
he is actually a more modern take on the werewolf. And we will get to him. His first appearance was in Amazing Spider-Man #1, March 1963, as himself, but then again as the Man-Wolf, basically, in Amazing Spider-Man #124 in September 1973, 10 years later. Colonel John Jameson, the son of Joan Jameson and J. Jonah Jameson, once the publisher of the famous newspaper Daily Bugle. He became one of the youngest applicants to ever be accepted into NASA's astronaut program. On his first mission, he went to orbit the Earth. Unfortunately, the capsule he was piloting lost its guidance packet and caused it to spin out of control. It was then that Peter Parker, who was watching the flight in his civilian identity, realized what was happening and put his Spider-Man costume on and jumped to John's rescue. John was rescued, but he had to wear a jumpsuit created by Tony Stark to contain the superhuman strength that he basically obtained from his incident. Now, after this, he was sent on a second mission, and this one was a secret mission to the moon. And while he was collecting lunar rock samples, he encountered a red gemstone and decided to bring it back. Back on Earth, he talked with a colleague who worked in the quarantine center and arranged to acquire the unique gemstone for himself. He basically made a pendant of it and began wearing it around his neck. But what ended up happening on the first night of a full moon after his return, the lunar luminescence reacted with the pendant and caused him to transform into a wolf-like humanoid creature, later called the Man-Wolf, and lose control over his actions. Now, this character is basically a cosmic version of a werewolf, as that stone had been imbued by power by another cosmic entity and had been left on the moon, basically lost on the moon, as the story goes. Man-Wolf is not really a villain. He is more of an anti-hero who has actually had to battle Spider-Man on plenty of occasions, but there are occasions where he does have his, he can think for himself and he's not overcome by his wolf rage, basically. and he knows that Spider-Man is his friend. He knows who he is. So he's another character that we may see in the MCU slightly. They may not bring him out as the Wolf. They might just be as Jameson.
Yeah, because he's been in. I know he was in the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man.
Right.
Because his mission to the moon, and then he got the first thing that happened to him. And by the way, this guy has run into more bad luck than I've ever seen. Jonah Jameson III.
Right.
Because the suit that he has to wear, I think they covered that in Spider-Man 2 or 3. It's one of them.
Yeah, it kind of contains his energies.
Yeah, the one that Tony Stark built. Yeah.
Okay, so our next character of interest is the Almighty Dracula, whose first appearance in Marvel Comics was Suspense #7 in November 1950. Dracula's background as follows. He was born in AD 1430. In 1444, he accompanied his father and Radu to Turkey to discuss peace, but they were ambushed and they were held prisoner by Sultan Murad II to force Vlad the Elder to favor Turkey. After 5 years of torture, Radu had died and Vlad the Elder and Mercia were killed by Vlad's advisors, led by John Hunyadi, for supporting Turkey. So at this time, Vlad had turned 18. He escaped and returned home and took the title of Prince of Wallachia, but fled after a year, fearing his father's killers. He returned in 1451 and threw himself at the mercy of Hunyadi, who trained him in war. Following through with a prearranged marriage, Vlad wedded Zofia, whom he despised. Now, it was after a year, with his obligations fulfilled, he ousted Zofia and their infant daughter, Lilith, again becoming Prince of Wallachia. He married his beloved Maria, sired Vlad Tepulus, ordered the impalement of all involved in his father's death, slew the Teutonic knight Frank von Frankenstein, and ordered a massed assault on Turkey. Dracula was taken to the gypsy Leander, who was secretly a vampire, who used her healing powers on him. With him being revived, but realizing his power moments too late to save Maria from an assault and murder by Turek, which caused him to become angry, and soon Turek fell before him. Dracula passed Varney's test, who Varney is actually he's thought to be the first vampire in vampire lore. Dracula passed Varney's test by destroying the false vampire lord Nimrod. And after Varney resurrected him from destruction by a group of priests, Dracula became the lord of vampires himself by consuming the blood of Varney, who then destroyed himself. And that is Vlad Dracula.
Looks
Now,
like the guy from Ghostbusters 2 in that picture.
Say that again?
Looks like the guy from Ghostbusters 2 in the picture on the left.
Yeah. But now you know a lot of this storyline, it almost mirrors that Dracula TV show that was done, it was done off the video game Castlevania. Yeah, you see a lot of these same characters in here. Sticking with that vampire theme, we move to our next character, who will soon be on the big screen as a Sony movie.
I think January, right?
Yeah, that's what they say, but you know how they're moving times and everything.
Yeah, it's been finished since last year.
Yeah, so we have Morbius, the living vampire, another horror character whose actual first appearance occurred in the annals of Amazing Spider-Man #101, October 1971. And basically his story is he was a Nobel Prize winning biochemist named Dr. Michael Morbius, who had created a cure for his rare blood disease that basically the cure itself turns into a curse. Basically, he attempted the experimental treatment on himself, and it transforms him into a pseudo vampire with superhuman powers and an overwhelming bloodlust. Like a real vampire, he needs to drink blood to survive. However, after drinking his victim's blood, his mind returns to normal and he becomes fraught with guilt, remorse, and self-loathing. So he's like the most emo vampire that you could probably come across. Uh, if you if you've ever read any of the stories, he sulks around until he's mad, and then when he's mad, literally all hell breaks loose.
Yeah, I remember him from the Spider-Man cartoon, and yes, he was
Right.
very mopey and broody.
Yeah, and you know what? He was so broody that I'm not even going to say that the vampires on Scooby-Doo were modeled after him, but I would take a bet that they were.
That would make sense though, because
Yeah.
Scooby-Doo came out in 1970.
So, all right. Our next, for all you zombie fans, the first zombie in a Marvel comic appeared in Menace #5, April 1953. Now, Menace was a pre-Marvel title, so it was, I think it was with Atlas or one of those
Yeah, Atlas
books. Now, they brought him back as a Marvel character in Zombie #1 in March 1973. Woohoo! Give it for March 1973, my birth year. All right. So Simon William Garth. It was at this time magic users on Earth had reanimated the dead using various means for thousands to millions of years. But the voodoo god Sagbada, although going by the name Baron Samedi, and the elder god Chthon combined forces in the 17th century to create a potent spell, and the most subsequent practitioners have tapped into this spell for their magic to create zombies. This is our zombie hero, or should we say, I guess you can say he's a haunted figure because
yeah, because I was like, he can't really be a hero.
Well, he has acted as a hero. Again, this is another character. Most of our horror characters are actually anti-heroes. They have done horrible things. But when it comes time, they have actually been in place to do some great things as well. War hero Simon Garth was the senior partner for 25 years to Brian Stockwood in Garwood Industries, a maker of leading Garth Manor coffee. He got divorced after assaulting his wife Miranda. So Garth raised their daughter Donna to adulthood in New Orleans, Louisiana. The controlling Garth violently berated and fired his gardener Gyps for lusting after Donna. Gyps later ambushed Garth, taking him into the bayou where a red sect of voodoo practitioners planned a human sacrifice. The priestess of the ritual was Layla, Garth's secretary, who had fallen in love with him. Layla pretended to perform the sacrifice, but then allowed Garth to flee into the swamp. But Gyps caught up to Garth and slew him with his gardening shears. Feeling cheated by Garth's quick death, Gyps forced Layla to transform Garth into a zombie. Upon digging out his fresh grave, Garth went on a rampage until one of the cultists placed an amulet of Damballa around the zombie's neck, giving its twin to Gyps, allowing him to control Garth. After failed efforts to use Garth to steal money, Gyps sent Garth to terrify Donna, intending to win her favor by pretending to rescue her. Seeing his daughter, however, Garth somehow threw off Gyps' control and slew his former master before returning to his bayou grave. And that's basically the backstory of the zombie Simon William Garth.
Yeah.
Our last character is, we're going to stay real short with this because a lot of this character will be revealed soon in whatever Marvel and Disney has planned. But Marvel's Moon Knight, actually the Marvel's version of Batman, is actually tied in with a lot of Marvel's current horror series. Basically just based on his background alone and the fact that he deals with the mystical. His first appearance was in Werewolf by Night, #32 in August 1975. Our main character, Moon Knight, real name Mark Spector, is a former Marine, CIA operative, and mercenary that suffers from multiple personalities and amoral tendencies. He was left to die in the Egyptian desert by a terrorist, where he made it to a nearby ancient tomb and into the hands of Marlene Alaroon, the daughter of an archaeologist murdered by Bushmen. Near death, Spector rose up to find a statue of the Egyptian deity Khonshu looming over him and believed it to have saved his life. Spector returned to the United States with his friends and set about creating not only a costumed identity he dubbed Moon Knight, but also began his war on crime. Now, if you have ever read any Moon Knight, his war on crime, he has dealt with sometimes the werewolf by night has gone crazy and had to be stopped. And because they're both creatures of the night and of the moon, he has been called to actually rid the town of the werewolf. Knowing that the werewolf is not a malignant or malicious creature, he has been able to save the werewolf on many occasions. He has also had to deal with the hobgoblin, as we know, which is the demonic version of the Green Goblin. Basically, when somebody stole the Green Goblin's technology, but ended up dibbling and dabbling in some black arts and ended up being possessed, and so they called on the Moon Knight to bring him down. And that is our last character, the Moon Knight, Mark Spector. Next, we move into some of the teams. Now, we can get through these kind of quick. The first one being the Midnight Suns. Now, these teams are teams that deal with the occult and supernatural things that happen in the Marvel Universe. The first being the Midnight Suns. Dr. Strange gathered this loose night confederation of mystically powered heroes, aka the Nine, to serve as mankind's first line of defense against the mother of demons, Lilith, and her children, the Lilin. After Lilith freed herself from the belly of an ancient beast known as the Leviathan, Strange began manipulating certain heroes, knowing that Lilith would ultimately seek to rip open the walls between the earthly dimension and the one where her children resided. The Midnight Suns were composed of Ghostwriter Daniel Ketch and Ghostwriter Johnny Blaze, the pseudo-vampire Morbius, the Night Stalkers, who were a group of mystic hunting heroes that included Blade, Frank Drake, and Hannibal King, and the Darkhold Redeemers, which included Louise Hastings, Victoria Montesi, and Sam Buchanan, who were all focused on destroying the ancient tome of evil known as the Darkhold and its physical embodiment, the Dwarf. And these are the Midnight Suns. All right. Our next group. Now,
Nick Fury.
yes, now some of you who have been reading comics for a minute will recognize the name Nick Fury's Howling Commandos as being actually, you know, in that first Captain America movie, that group of guys that he saved, that Captain America saves from the war camp and go on to fight alongside him. Those are the original Howling Commandos. Later in the 2000s, though, and maybe even before, I cannot remember, I don't have it directly in front of me, but Marvel rewrote the history of, well, basically let the Howling Commandos reform. They didn't rewrite anything, they reformed it. And because the head of the group is basically Captain Samuel Sawyer. And in the picture, you can see he actually looks close to Dum Dum Dugan, if that is not Dum Dum Dugan. I know that they brought him back because Dum Dum Dugan ended up taking super soldier serum as well later on. Sergeant Fury's Howling Commandos that were formed by Captain Samuel Sawyer. It was rewritten that the beginning of the involvement of American forces in World War II, the group became honorary commandos in the British Army, where they were given their code name, the Howling Commandos. Now, they were known to fight villains such as the Red Skull, Dracula, Baron Wolfgang von Strucker, and Mr. Sinister. And as you can see, some of the characters or that would be involved are the Frankenstein, the Man-Thing, Manphibian, the Werewolf by Night, and there are a couple of more characters. Now, our next group, we're not going to talk about them too much because we will discuss them as a series, but this group is the Spirits of Vengeance, which is the team that consists of basically Ghostwriter, Hellstrom, Satana, and Blade. All right, popular series and storylines. First, we have Journey into Mystery. Now, these are the books that the stories basically occurred in first, but as we said before, Marvel basically retooled and re-released their horror stories and their pulp stories over and over again over the years, so that they would pick up with other generations. They basically just changed the name. So one of these first tomes is called Journey into Mystery, 1952 to 1966. It was initially a horror comic anthology, but it changed into a giant monster and science fiction story book in the late 50s. This book has the stories that led to the debut of Thor in Journey into Mystery number 83 in August 1962. So it starts going full circle, and I guess you could say that the Thor stories would fall into the monster and science fiction realm outside of horror. The next thing would be Tales of Suspense. This title, 1959 to 1968, it mixed science fiction with superheroes. Tales of Suspense showcased out-of-this-world pulp-style adventure in its early days before becoming the home of Iron Man and Captain America. Now, on our next slide, we have some that these popped up in the 70s. Now, with the resurgence of horror and the dropping of the Comic Code Authority, even though some of the books still had the sticker, we have the Crypt of Shadows, which was published from 1973 to 1975 and brought back currently in 2019. So this is one that you can go look for, Crypt of Shadows. It was a collection of popular horror tropes from the 1950s. The new anthology basically has all new stories by the same guy who writes the Hulk, Al Ewing. Our next title would be Chamber of Chills, published from 1972 to 1976. While these presented new horror stories of the sci-fi genre, this title quickly devolved into reprints of some of the same 1950 stories used before, as well as retellings of some horror classics such as Edgar Allan Poe's The Cask of Amontillado. All right, on our next slide, we have the Tomb series, 1972 to 1979, a very popular series, Tomb of Dracula. This series basically follows a group of vampire hunters as they track and fight Dracula and other supernatural horrors. This series also has Dracula having to work with the vampire hunters on occasion to thwart common threats or battle these threats on his own. Around the same time that we have Tomb of Dracula, we have the Tomb of Darkness. Now, this series was originally titled Beware, and it consisted of reprinted stories from Tales of Suspense and Tales to Astonish. In this series, aliens were the main antagonists, although there were also storylines with your classic monsters and supernatural themes. Those are basically the legacy series. And now we'll move into some of the newer series that started in the 80s. We'll come forward with the Demon Bear Saga, where this storyline is actually being retold in the New Mutants movie that released not too long ago. But this was a 1983-1984 storyline that jumped off the New Mutants series. It was in the beginning of the New Mutant storyline that Danielle Moonstar has a psychic vision of a bear killing her parents. And after her parents disappear for real, she finds that they have been captured and transformed into the demonic bear spirit, where she ends up battling the bear to release her parents, but only after the bear sends her to the hospital with a spinal injury. The new mutants themselves step in to finish the battle by disrupting the very being of the demon bear with magic soul sword. So, there were some changes in the movie, but this right here was a real horror series inside of a regular X-Men style based storyline. And I want to say it got very dark at the times, basically because of the artwork that was used and the fact that you always thought that this stuff was happening in the physical world. You only learn later that it's all happening in her mind.
Yeah, the Claremont, when he introduced this, because he's the one who kind of rebooted the original X-Men to the
Right.
to the astonishing X-Men in the 70s, and he's the one who introduced you to like Wolverine and Storm. He brought those characters in. So when he brought New Mutants, it was so out there, like people it just gravitated towards it because it was something new in that X-Men world.
Right.
He had quite a hold over the 70s and the 80s and I think into the 90s of Marvel and X-Men especially.
Right. All right. Real quick, our next slide will be the storyline Hellstrom, Prince of Lies, that ran from 1993 to 1994. Now, this storyline is just Hellstrom struggling with his demonic nature and evil parentage. He's faced with many obstacles as he again walks the world of mortal men. In this story, he comes face to face with Doctor Strange, the Gargoyle, Gabriel, the Devil Hunter, and others as he enlists their help fighting demons, murderers, faith healers, and damned souls, all while navigating the path back to hell. That's Hellstrom, Prince of Lies. Now, this storyline here, I will let you know now that this does not happen in the realm of the regular Marvel universe.
616.
It doesn't happen in 616. This is a storyline from Earth 2149. And although I went and read a little bit more on this, and how this started was the superhero Sentry basically had a virus from the zombies because he came from the future. He was stuck in a time loop. And so what this time loop did was every time the time loop recircled around in this earth, he basically ended up restarting the virus. First, he shows up, and I think it's Spider-Man and a couple of other characters that come in contact with him, and he infects them, and they end up taking down basically the majority of the superheroes and setting off a worldwide, basically a pandemic. Now, where it really gets ugly is that the Avengers become the first casualties. Around this time, the Silver Surfer, who is again the herald to Galactus, basically comes to Earth to warn Earth that Galactus is approaching, just so that the heroes can get ready, because they have had to find a way to fend Galactus off or find him a new world to eat. Once the Silver Surfer comes to Earth, though, he notices that something is wrong, and he goes looking for the Avengers. It's at this time that the Hulk basically bites his head off and throws his body down into a pile, and the Avengers feed. Now, feeding on the Silver Surfer gives them a taste of the power cosmic. So, in essence, they get hungrier and hungrier. They destroy all life on Earth. except for a few human holdouts. But they bring Galactus down. And once they bring Galactus down, they have basically feasted and gained the total power cosmic. They strike out across the galaxy, and in 40 years, they consume the majority of life in the known universe. And the storyline completes again because the Sentry is one of the last heroes standing, but he has been infected. And he comes back to warn the heroes that this is happening, and he starts the cycle over and over again. And that's Marvel Zombies, 2005, 2006. And I might say that it's one of the worst Marvel storylines out there as far as horror.
I was like, wow, Roland.
No, not in bad. I mean, just that and this latest King in Black series, they're quite vicious. Okay, so I know we said we were going to speak of the Spirits of Vengeance storyline because that group is actually the name of the group is actually the name of the storyline, and it was a story that was published from 2017 to 2018. Now, Spirits of Vengeance is a storyline set in the vestiges of the war between heaven and hell. After the discovery of a dead angel, Johnny Blaze must find the culprit and punish them as the Ghostwriter. In order to accomplish this, he gathers the help of Marvel's supernatural unholy elite. The team consists of Ghostwriter, Hellstorm, his sister Satana, and Blade. And that is Spirits of Vengeance. Now, this may be, I put this last because I found out that this is Marvel's most popular horror series to date. And to me, for God knows what, I did not know that this was listed as a horror series. But we are talking about 2018's Immortal Hulk, which is actually still running now. It's titled as 2018 to present. So in this storyline, the Devil Hulk seals all the other incarnations of the Hulk away inside Bruce Banner. There's one Hulk left that doesn't mind the wait to be released. So it's just the Immortal Hulk who is all powerful. And in this series, he not only escapes from Bruce Banner, but he escapes from hell itself. It was said that when I read what other people were saying about this storyline, they were really saying that the storyline was a typical Marvel Hulk storyline, but the visuals and the things that the Hulk has to go through, his trials and tribulations during this storyline, are what make it a horror series. And this is one that I plan on reading very soon. And that is the Immortal Hulk. Here we have some of the other popular horror fiction that Marvel has done that is available, that they are available. And these titles are actually by other popular authors, not your regular comic writers. We have Empire of the Dead by George Romero of, I think, Night of the Living Dead fame. We have Stephen King's The Stand. We have Clive Barker's Hellraiser. And we have Ridley Scott's Aliens. Any one of these, I would suggest you check out if you would like a good scare.
The Stand is very good. They did a really great job capturing that humongous book into a graphic series.
Yeah, the only one of these that I've read, I checked out Empire of the Dead, and I read the Aliens. The Aliens one is real good. Now they supposedly have another one where they are bringing the not just the Aliens, but the Predator.
Oh yeah,
they actually have a book.
Yeah.
So this brings us to the end of Marvel's horror. These are a bit of the places where we got our information.
Yep, if you want to check them out, do your own research. Should be sure to see if there are any others that you want to see covered on the Graphic Novel Club. Feel free to reach out to us through the chat or through, through email or coming by the branch. And just a reminder, if you are a Clayton County library card holder, you do have access to Comics Plus, which gives you access to thousands of digital comics that you can, and graphic novels and manga that you could download directly to your device, whether it be tablet, computer, or smartphone. So with your library card, and you can sign up today at go to claytonpl.org and our learning and research, and then Comics Plus. And as we come to the end today, again, if you have any feedback, you want to reach out to us, feel free through the chat or email or just stopping by the branch. We will be covering the same genre, horror, and DC Comics in 2 weeks. So similar format to this, but it will be October 26th at 4 p.m. Same bat place, same bat time, and same URL there.
And I hear DC's got the stuff to scare your socks off too. Some stuff I hadn't even touched yet.
Yeah, as I've started my research, a lot of DC stuff is, yeah. But we'll cover that in 2 weeks. So, all right.
Right.
Have a great Tuesday.